Chapter 3 Life in the World. Once everyone decided to proceed from theory to practice on the basis of Bhagwan's teachings, the question was apt to arise how that affected his life in the world. Hinduism does not necessarily enjoin physical renunciation for active spiritual seekers, as did, for instance, the original teaching of Christ or Buddha. On the contrary, the state of the householder is honored and the path of right action is a legitimate path. In fact, the classical system in ancient India was that a man should retire into the homeless state only after he had fulfilled his duties as a householder and had an adult son or sons to replace him. However, the doctrine of non-duality, together with the path of self-enquiry, which is based on it, has been traditionally recognized as suitable to the world renouncer. It is therefore natural that Bhagwan's followers often asked him whether they should renounce the world. At the same time, it was a remarkable indication of the amount of spiritual determination which still remains in modern India. For renouncing the world does not mean living a solitary life in a little house and garden of one's own, as it might in the West, or even retiring to the austere security of a monastery, but going forth homeless and penniless, depending on the charitable for food and clothing, and sleeping in a cave or temple, or wherever possible. It does sometimes happen in modern times that a sadhu accepts a small grant from his family, enough to buy food and the simplest clothing. But even so, it is a bare, hard life. Nevertheless, there were constant requests to be allowed to take this life, and constantly Bhagwan withheld permission. The work was internal and had to be done in the mind, whatever the conditions of life. B. Why do you think you are a householder? The similar thought that you are a sannyasi will haunt you even if you go forth as one. Whether you continue in the household or renounce it and go and live in the forest, your mind haunts you. The ego is the source of thought. It creates the body and the world and makes you think of being a householder. If you renounce, it will only substitute the thought of renunciation for that of the family and the environment of the forest for that of the household. But the mental obstacles are always there for you. They even increase greatly in the new surroundings. Change of environment is no help. The one obstacle is the mind, and this must be overcome, whether in the home or in the forest. If you can do it in the forest, why not in the home? So why change the environment? Your efforts can be made even now, whatever be the environment. D. Is it possible to enjoy samadhi while busy with worldly works? B. It is the feeling I work that is the hindrance. Ask yourself, who works? Remember who you are. Then the work will not bind you. It will go on automatically. Make no effort either to work or to renounce. Your effort is the bondage. What is destined to happen will happen. If you are destined to work, you will not be able to avoid it. You will be forced to engage in it. So leave it to the higher power. It is not really your choice whether you renounce or retain. When women carrying jars of water on their heads stop to talk, they are very careful, keeping their mind on the water jars. Similarly, when a sage engages in activity, his mind remains fixed in the self, and his activity does not distract him. D. I believe celibacy is necessary even for a householder if he is to succeed in self-inquiry. Am I right? B. First find out who the wife and husband are. Then the question will not arise. D. Isn't brahmacharya or celibacy necessary for realization of the self? B. Brahmacharya means living in Brahman. It has no connection with celibacy as commonly understood. A real brahmachari is one who lives in Brahman and finds bliss in Brahman, which is the same as self. Why then should he look for other sources of happiness? In fact, it is emergence from the self that is the cause of all misery. D. But isn't celibacy necessary for yoga? B. It is one aid to realization among many others. D. Then, is it not indispensable? Can a married man realize the self? B. Certainly. It is a question of fitness of mind. Married or unmarried, a man can realize the self because the self is here and now. If it were not, but were obtainable by some effort at some future time, if it were something new to be acquired, it would not be worth seeking, because what is not natural cannot be permanent. What I say is that the self is here and now, and that it alone is. D. Is it necessary to take sannyasa or a vow of renunciation in order to attain self-realization? B. Sannyasa means renouncing one's individuality, not shaving one's head and putting it on ochre robes. A man may be a householder, but if he does not think he is one, he is a sannyasin. On the other hand, he may wear ochre robes and wander about, but so long as he thinks he is a sannyasin, he is not one. To think about one's renunciation defeats the purpose of renouncing. What do you mean by taking sannyas? Do you think it means leaving your house or wearing robes of a certain color? Wherever you go, even if you fly up into the air, will not your mind go with you? Or can you leave it behind you and go without it? Why should your occupation or duties in life interfere with your spiritual effort? For instance, there is a difference between your activities at home and in the office. Is your office activities? You're detached, and so long as you do your duty, you do not care what happens or whether it results in gain or loss to the employer. Your duties at home, on the other hand, are performed with attachment, and you are all the time anxious whether they will bring advantage to you and your family. But it is possible to perform all activities of life with detachment and regard only the self as real. It is wrong to suppose that if one is fixed in the self, one's duties in life will not be properly performed. It is like an actor. He dresses and acts and even feels the part he is playing, but he knows really that he is not that character, but someone else in real life. In the same way, why should the body consciousness or the feeling I am the body disturb you, once you know for certain that you are not the body but the self? Nothing that the body does should shake you from abidance in the self. Such abidance will never interfere with the proper and effective discharge of whatever duties the body has, any more than an actor's being aware of his real status in life interferes with his acting a part on stage. D. It has been definitely stated that so long as there is the least trace of the I am the doer idea, there can be no realization. But is it possible for a householder who earnestly desires liberation to fulfill his duties without this idea? B. There is no principle that actions can be performed only on the basis of the I am the doer idea, and therefore there is no reason to ask whether they can be performed and the duties discharged without the idea. To take a common example, an accountant working all day in his office and scrupulously attending to his duties might seem to the spectator to be shouldering all the financial responsibilities of the institution. But, knowing that he is not personally affected by the intake or outgoings, he remains unattached and free from the I am the doer feeling in doing his work, while at the same time he does it perfectly well. In the same way, it is quite possible for the wise householder who earnestly seeks liberation to discharge his duties in life, which after all are his destiny, without any attachment, regarding himself merely as an instrument for the purpose. Such activity is not an obstacle on the path of knowledge, nor does knowledge prevent a man from discharging his duties in life. Knowledge and activity are never mutually antagonistic, and the realization of one does not impede performance of the other, nor performance of one the realization of the other. D. What is the significance of the life of a spiritually minded householder who has to devote all his time merely to earning a living and supporting his family, and what mutual benefit do they get? B. The discharge of his duties by a householder, such as this, who works for the support of his family, quite unmindful of his own physical comforts in life, should be regarded as selfless service rendered to his family, whose needs it is his destiny to meet. It may, however, be asked what benefit such a householder derives from the family. The answer is that there is no benefit for him from the family as such, since he has made the discharge of his duties to them a means of spiritual training, and since he finally obtains perfect contentment by realizing the supreme bliss of liberation, which is the ultimate goal of every path and the supreme reward. He therefore stands in need of nothing from the members of his family or from his family life. D. How can a householder who is constantly engaged in the active discharge of his domestic duties, which should naturally impel him to still greater activity, obtain the supreme peace of withdrawal and freedom from the urge to such activity, even while thus busily engaged? B. It is only to the spectator that the enlightened householder seems to be occupied with his domestic duties. For even though apparently engaged in domestic duties, he is not really engaged in any activity at all. His outer activity does not prevent him from realizing the perfect peace of withdrawal, and he is free from the restless urge to activity even in the midst of his activities. Visitor. Should I retire from business and take to reading books on Vedanta? B. If objects have an independent existence, that is, if they exist somewhere apart from you, then it may be possible for you to retire from them. But they do not. They owe their existence to you, to your thought. So where can you retire from them? As for reading books on Vedanta, you can go on reading any number, but they can only tell you to realize the self within you. The self cannot be found in books. You have to find it for yourself, in yourself. D. Is a vow of silence useful? B. The inner silence is self-surrender, and that means living without the sense of ego. D. Is solitude necessary for a sannyasin? B. Solitude is in the mind of a man. One may be in the thick of the world and yet maintain perfect serenity of mind. Such a person is always in solitude. Another may live in the forest but still be unable to control his mind. He cannot be said to be in solitude. Solitude is an attitude of the mind. A man attached to things of life cannot get solitude, wherever he may be, whereas a detached man is always in solitude. The silence of solitude is forced. Restrained speech in society is equivalent to silence, for then a man controls his speech. There must be a speaker before there can be a speech. If the mind of the speaker is engaged otherwise, speech is restrained. When the mind is turned inwards, it is active in a different way and is not anxious to speak. The purpose of a vow of silence is to limit the mental activities provoked by speech. But if the mind is controlled, this is unnecessary and silence becomes natural. D. How does activity help? Doesn't it simply increase the already heavy load upon us that we have to get rid of? B. Action performed unselfishly purifies the mind and helps it to fix itself in meditation. D. But suppose one were to meditate constantly without activity. B. Try and see. Your inherent tendencies will not let you. Meditation only comes step by step with their gradual weakening by the grace of the Guru. D. I have no pleasure in my family. There remains nothing for me to do there. I have done what has to be done, and now there are grandsons and granddaughters in the house. Should I remain there, or should I leave it and go away? B. You should stay just where you are now. But where are you now? Are you in the house, or is the house in you? Is there any house apart from you? If you become established in your own place, you will find that all things have merged into you, and such questions will become unnecessary. D. Then it seems I am to remain at home? B. You are to remain in your true state. D. Can I engage in spiritual practice even while remaining in the life of the world? B. Yes, certainly. Why not to do so? D. Isn't life in the world a hindrance? Don't all books advocate renunciation? B. The world is only in the mind. It does not speak out saying, I am the world. If it did, it would have to be always present even in your sleep. Since it is not present in sleep, it is impermanent. Being impermanent, it has no reality. Having no reality, it is easily subdued by the self. The self alone is permanent. Renunciation is non-identification of the self with the non-self. On the disappearance of ignorance, the non-self ceases to exist. That is true renunciation. D. Why then did you leave your home in your youth? B. That was my prarabdha, destiny. One's course of conduct in this life is predetermined by one's prarabdha. My prarabdha lies this way, yours lies that way. D. Should I not also renounce? B. If that had been your prarabdha, the question would not have arisen. D. Then I take it that I should remain in the world and engage in spiritual practice. But if I do so, can I obtain realization in this life? B. This has already been answered. You are always the self. Earnest effort never fail. Success is bound to result. D. Why is the world enveloped in ignorance? B. Look after yourself and let the world look after itself. What is yourself? If you are the body, there is a physical world also. But if you are the spirit, there is only spirit. Visitor. What do you think about social reform? B. Self-reform automatically results in social reform. Attend to self-reform, and social reform will take care of itself. B. Now I will ask you a question. When a man gets into a train, where does he put his luggage? D. Either in the compartment or in the luggage van. B. He doesn't carry it on his head or in his lap while in the train. D. Only a fool would do so. B. It is 1,000 times more foolish to bear your own burden once you have undertaken the spiritual quest, whether by the path of knowledge or devotion. D. But how can I relinquish all my responsibilities, all my commitments? B. You remember the temple tower? There are many statues on it, aren't there? Well, there are 4 big ones at the base, one at each corner. Have you seen them? D. Yes. B. Well, I tell you that the huge tower is supported by these 4 statues. D. How is that possible? What does Bhagwan mean? B. I mean that to say that is no more foolish than saying that you bear all the cares, burdens and responsibilities of life. The Lord of the universe bears the whole burden. You only imagine that you do. You can hand over all your burdens to Him. Whatever you have to do, you will be made an instrument for doing it at the right time. Do not imagine that you cannot do it unless you have the desire to. It is not desire that gives you the necessary strength. The strength is the Lord's. D. Will Bhagwan give his opinion on the future of the world as we are living in critical times? B. Why should you worry about the future? You don't even know the present properly. Take care of the present, and the future will take care of itself. D. Will the world soon enter a new era of friendliness and mutual help, or will it go down in chaos and war? B. There is one who governs the world, and it is his task to look after it. He who has given life to the world knows how to look after it also. He bears the burden of this world, not you. D. Yet, if one looks around with unprejudiced eyes, it is hard to see where this benevolent care comes in. B. As you are, so is the world. Without understanding yourself, What is the use of trying to understand the world? There is a question that seekers after truth need not worry about. People waste their energy over all such questions. First find out the truth behind yourself. Then you will be in a better position to understand the truth behind the world of which you are a part. Another visitor asked Bhagwan for a benedictory foreword to a book he had written called The Destiny of the Freedom, or something of that sort. He said that someone else had already agreed to write an introduction, but he would be grateful if Bhagwan would write a few words conveying his message and blessing. Bhagwan explained to him that he had never done such a thing and therefore should not be expected to now. The visitor persisted, and I went to some trouble to convince him that all his persuasion would be in vain. Then he began saying that the world badly needs a spiritual message, and that the youth of India and of the world are not properly brought up, since religion is not instilled into them, and so forth. I had to tell him that Bhagwan holds that before a man tries to reform the world, he should first know himself, and then he can go about reforming the world if he still feels so inclined. I believe the visitor was continuing the argument, but fortunately, it was for the time for the Parayana recital of Vedas, and he was effectively stopped thereby. D. Should I try to help the suffering world? B. The power that created you created the world as well. If God created the world, it is His business to look after it, not yours. D. But we see pain in the world. A man is hungry. It is a physical reality. It is very real to him. Are we to call it a dream and remain unmoved by his suffering? B. From the point of view of jnana or reality, the suffering you speak of is certainly a dream, as is the world of which that suffering is an infinitesimal part. In a dream, you have, when you are asleep, you yourself feel hunger and see others also suffering from hunger. You feed yourself and, moved by pity, feed the others who are hungry. So long as the dream lasted, all this suffering was quite as real as the suffering you see in the world is to you now. It was only when you woke up that you discovered it to be unreal. You might have eaten heartily before going to sleep, but you still dreamed that you had been working hard in the hot sun all day and were tired and hungry. Then you woke up and found that your stomach was full and that you had not stirred from your bed. But all this is not to say that while you are in the dream, you can act as if the suffering you feel in it is not real. The hunger in the dream has to be appeased by dream food. The fellow beings you find hungry in the dream have to be provided with dream food. You can never mix the two states, the dream and the waking state. Similarly, till you attain the state of realization and thus wake out of this illusory, phenomenal world, you must do social service by reliving suffering wherever you see it. But even so, you must do it without ahankara, that is, without the sense of, it is I who am doing it. Instead, you should feel, I am the Lord's instrument. Similarly, you must not be conceited and think, I am helping a man who is below me. He needs help and I am in a position to give it. I am superior and he is inferior. You must help him as a means of worshipping God in him. All such service is serving the self, not anybody else. You are not helping anybody else but only yourself. D. Is it not our duty to be patriots? B. It is your duty to be and not to be this or that. I am that I am sums up the whole of truth. The method is summarized in be still. D. Is the desire for Swaraj, independence, right? B. Such desire no doubt begins with self-interest. Yet, practical work for the goal gradually widens the outlook so that the individual becomes merged in the country. Such merging of the individuality is desirable, and the karma in question is nishkam or unselfish. D. If self-government for India is granted along a long struggle, after a long struggle and terrible sacrifice, is one not justified in being pleased with the result and elated by it? B. In the course of one's work, one must have surrendered oneself to the higher power, whose might must be kept in mind and never lost sight of. How then can one be elated? One should not even care for the result of one's action. Then alone the karma becomes unselfish. Gandhiji has surrendered himself to the divine and works accordingly, with no self-interest. He does not concern himself with the results, but accepts them as they turn up. That must be the attitude of national workers. Questioner. Will the work be crowned with success? B. This question arises because the questioner has not surrendered himself. Questioner. Should we then not think of and work for the welfare of the country? B. First take care of yourself, and the rest will naturally follow. Questioner. I am not speaking individually but for the country. B. First surrender and then see. Doubts arise because of the absence of surrender. Acquire strength by surrender, and then your surroundings will be found to have improved to the degree of strength acquired by you. D. Why doesn't Sri Bhagwan go about preaching the truth to the people at large? B. How do you know that I don't? Does preaching consist in mounting a platform and haranguing the people around? Preaching is simple communication of knowledge and can be done in silence too. What do you think of a man listening to a harangue for an hour and going away without being impressed by it so as to change his life? Compare him with another who sits in a holy presence and leaves after some time with his outlook on life totally changed. Which is better, to preach loudly without effect, or to sit silently sending forth intuitive force to act on others? Again, how does speech arise? First, there is abstract knowledge, unmanifest. From this there arises the ego, which gives rise to thoughts and words successively. Words, therefore, are the great grandsons of the original source. If words can produce an effect, consider how much more powerful preaching through silence must be. D. Does my realization help others? B. Yes, certainly. It is the best possible help, but really, there are no others to help. For a realized being sees only the self, just as a goldsmith, estimating the gold in various jewels, sees only the gold. Separate forms and beings exist only as long as you identify yourself with the body. When you transcend the body, others disappear along with your body consciousness. D. Is it so with plants and trees also? B. Do they exist at all, apart from the self? Find out. You think that you see them. The thought is projected from yourself. Find out where from it arises. Then thoughts will cease to rise and the self alone will remain. D. I understand theoretically, but they are still there. B. Yes, it is like a cinema hall. There is light on the screen and the shadows flitting across impress the audience as the acting of some story. Now suppose that in this film story, an audience is also shown on the screen. The seer and the seen will then both be on the screen. Apply this to yourself. You are the screen. The self has created the ego. The ego has its accretions of thoughts which are displayed on the world, trees, plants, etc., about which you are talking. In reality, all these are nothing but the self. If you see the self, it will be found to be all, everywhere and always. Nothing but the self exists. The same was explained to Mr. Evans Wentz, the well-known writer from Tibet. E.W. They say that there are many saints in Tibet who remain in solitude and are still very helpful to the world. How can that be? B. It can be so. Realization of the self is the greatest help that can be rendered to humanity. Therefore, saints are said to be helpful, even though they remain in the forests. But it should not be forgotten that solitude is not to be found in forests alone. It can be had even in towns in the thick of worldly occupation. E.W. Isn't it necessary that saints should mix with people and be helpful to them? B. The self alone is the reality. The world and the rest of it are not. The realized being does not see the world as different from himself. E.W. Then does that mean that a man's realization leads to the uplift of mankind without their being aware of it? B. Yes. The help is imperceptible, but it is still there. A realized man helps the whole of mankind, although without their knowledge. E.W. Wouldn't it be better if he mixed with others? B. There are no others to mix with. The self is the one and only reality. E.W. If there were 100 self-realized men, wouldn't it be to the greater benefit of the world? B. When you say self, you refer to the unlimited. But when you add men to it, you limit the meaning. There is only one infinite self. E.W. Yes, I see. Shri Krishna said in the Gita that work must be performed without attachment, and such work is better than idleness. Is that karma yoga? B. What is said is adapted to the temperament of the listener. E.W. In Europe, some people do not understand that a man can be helpful in solitude. They imagine that only men who work in the world can be useful. When will this confusion cease? Will the European mind continue wading in the morass, or will it realize the truth? B. Never mind about Europe or America. Where are they but in the mind? Realize yourself and then all is realized. If you see a number of men in a dream and then wake up and recall your dream, do you try to find out whether the persons of your dream creation are also awake? A self-realized being cannot help benefiting the world. His very existence is the highest good.